Okay, so
Get used to it more. Oh.
everyone, welcome to the debate. We're going to be discussing should China slow down the economic growth due to environmental reasons. If someone wants to give a point just first, and then we can take it off from there.
I think that China and India contribute over half of the world's CO2 emissions or something like that.
Yeah,
So
it's huge.
They're a very significant problem to the environment.
Yeah, it's something like 300,000 premature deaths happen yearly in China from environmental reasons, from pollution.
The only thing they've committed to is to reach their peak by 2030. So that's not bringing it down or anything. That's just peaking before 2030.
Yeah.
The governments in both the countries are an issue as well, because they both have very much populist leaders, kind of wanting
very strong democracies
to support economic growth. That's their main priority, I think, in both countries. Even though China might say they're communist, they're very much keen to be on power.
But I think the Western worlds have, since the Industrial Revolution, have been using really environmentally damaging machines and systems to make themselves rich. So why are we depriving other countries from doing the same thing? They're just doing what like Britain has done. They're just trying to become economically stable as well. And surely they can use the same methods that we have.
If we're going to take the case of China here, they're becoming sort of economically imperialist, so they're expanding into Africa to places like Ethiopia and Kenya. And what they're doing is they're taking most of the profit. And so it's sort of the same expansionism that we did, and we're just taking the rights away from these minor nations again. I don't get how doing it twice is going to solve the problem.
And I think the first time, you'd have thought that other countries would have learnt from mistakes Western countries made back in the 18th, 19th centuries. And as a worldwide community, we would have moved on and learnt lessons.
Yeah, I kind of agree somewhat with what Neve says, though, because how can we deprive a certain country from what they can grow to be? At the moment, they're producing the same amount of CO2 output than Britain did in 1960s. So although obviously we have more knowledge these days about the environmental impacts of that, shouldn't we allow a less developed country to become a high developed country?
Well, I would say that basically we've now, I think, touching more on what the other guys were saying in terms of we now have the knowledge of how detrimental our industrial revolution was to the environment, that it's not good enough to point a finger and say don't do it this way. You need to offer up an alternative solution. And I think it's our duty as a developed nation and in organisations we're part of, in order to uplift other countries and provide them an actual alternative, rather than just telling them not to do something with no other means to do it. We still need to figure out
Then you do have that. You have EDF, the French energy company, is actually helping deal with China's energy supply and their carbon market.
EDF is an interesting one because there's an argument, we're not using, they use a lot of nuclear fuel, and then there's a debate of whether nuclear fuel is better than traditional fossil fuels, because it doesn't release CO2, but then you also have the very toxic byproducts for thousands of years. So
yes, but then a smaller quantity than CO2, so it's overall less detrimental.
I would argue it's far easier to deal. You can deal with CO2 by absorbing it. There are more ways to absorb that than to actually, with nuclear waste.
I think also from a research point of view, also I don't think there's necessarily enough data on how to actually effectively get rid of those harmful materials as well.
I think we also have to counter in the fact about how large China is. Although we say, China and India together create half the world's carbon dioxide output, China compared to Britain.
Can I change that fact? It's actually half of the world's coal supply is burnt in China only.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's pretty high, but we still have to counter in the fact that, their population is so much larger than Britain's, and they just have a larger, surface area for the country.
And I don't
Also, sorry, the Western world is also relying on China and India, their produce. So we are also supporting them because everything we buy is made in China. We are supporting this like destructive industry. Why can we be so sententious about it if we're fueling this unethical growth?
Can I back that up with a fact? 72% of the clove industry's CO2 output is actually responsible. That can be held accountable by international companies that aren't Chinese. So it's actually more our fault than theirs.
Yeah, exactly. But I think also, in a way, as much as it's like, oh, we shouldn't have one nation contributing such a significant amount, in a way, sometimes it might be better to concentrate production sites and factories in one place in order to reduce the amount of like transit between lots of different places and all the middle stations of factories. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because that does happen. You have people claiming things were made in one place just because it was assembled somewhere. Like cars that are made in Germany, but then like half the parts could have been made in China and then just assembled there, things like that. But sometimes it is actually more energy efficient to concentrate everything in, let's say, one zone of China and have all the factories there and all the processing units and all the assembly units there, and then ship it from there rather than shipping at each step, if that makes sense.
Sort of just screwing over China, their air quality is going to be awful, whereas the rest of the world will be nice and clean. We can't really just have all of the CO2 emissions in one country and none in any other.
I mean,
If they want to continue that way, then they deserve it, because we are providing a number of alternatives around the globe. There are schemes in which countries like the US, the UK and France, after the Paris Accord, paid into for less developed countries to skip the industrial phase or to skip the coal using phase. And so they have options. So if they continue down this line, they deserve to have the worst air quality.
I think
it's not only China's fault though, because the rest of the world consumes the things they do, and it's not like people are trying to stop to do that. They're just telling China that they have to stop mass producing, but the people that they're mass producing for is the people that are telling them to stop. So maybe before telling them that, stop buying their goods, and that's gonna like force them to economically stop, because they won't be able to pay for that stuff anymore.
The onus is on China. Do they lead or do they follow? And do they have the chance to lead, but they keep turning it down?
I mean, the U.S. is not much different. It's like the U.S. and China are like the two biggest consumer markets. I think just like this year, China surpassed it. I'm not sure, but like they're head to head, and it's like everyone's focusing on China and they're not focusing on the US. And the thing is about the US, the only reason why no one focuses on it as much is because it mostly creates consumer goods for itself, but it's still like a lot. And China, well, it also like produces a lot of goods. It's mostly you provide like globally. And although like the US does provide globally, it doesn't do it in a large scale like China. So it's really like that scenario where like it's both within a country and like within a country for other countries.
I think there's a question: do China want to slow down? Because with the more they produce, the more economic power and thus political power they get. So I think I don't think they're going to slow down by their own accord, because it may damage their environment, but they're going to be very rich. I think like Western countries have to stand up to them, and like, because we all want to get stuff from China because it's cheap, but we need to kind of put the environment first and also think of our own security before we let China kind of carry on doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, after all, everyone just wants money, like, but I think we also have to counter in the fact that, like, how much COVID is actually going to, like, benefit them, although they've been hit pretty hard. Obviously, it started off there. Like, the UK's economy and other big HIC economies have, like, shrunk massively, whereas China's hasn't actually shrunk that much. So, in comparison, they're coming out quite well.
The virus wasn't planned. It occurred naturally. And because China is such an authoritarian regime, they wanted to hide any semblance of failure or anything that might distinguish them as not having complete control. And the fact that it got out was more a reflection on their tight grip on power than of them planning a foreign catastrophe.
I think, I don't want to get diverted, but I would say there is stuff. Former MI6, like, top person has said, you know, it's very suspicious, but we probably should go back to the core topic of the environment.
What's China's governmental situation?
Very, very democratic.
Yeah, it's the PRC. You know, it's the People's Republic, just as North Korea is the People's Democratic Republic of Korea.
It's an authoritarian one-party state with no freedom of speech or opposition to the government. Tiananmen Square didn't happen, and if you tried to report on COVID before it got out, you had a hit taken out on you pretty much.
I know that obviously China is responsible for a large amount of the world's CO2 output, but I think the idea that they're responsible for all of it is quite dangerous, because there's a lot of companies in the Western world that are responsible for a large chunk of CO2 emissions, such as Shell, who had more CO2 emissions, or were responsible for more CO2 emissions than 150 countries. And at the end of the day, China's making a lot of products and services for people in the Western world and we're consuming. So I think, although yes, obviously China should reduce their CO2 emissions, we need to make sure that we don't lose track of our own.
We're not saying that. It's just the fact that we do it doesn't absolve them from their sins either. So they aren't innocent. I think that's the way to put it.
I think, yeah, because there's obviously an issue. It's like easy to get like political stuff mixed into the bag, like the fact that you
can't not get political stuff mixed in.
But I would like to draw some new statistics, which per capita, although China are almost by total country size, have nearly twice as much CO2 emissions than the United States, who are in second place. The most per capita is Saudi Arabia, and then Australia, and then Canada, then the US, and China is in 12th place. So I don't know, so it's interesting, per person it's actually much lower down.
Yeah, that's countering the fact again that the population is so large.
With Saudi Arabia, do you think it's the oil or like the air conditioning? Why is it so?
Well, for Australia it is. It's for air conditioning, and because they need far more devices to cope with the heat. I don't know about elsewhere.
No, Australia's wildfires. Surely their wildfires would impact that CO2 emission.
Partially, but not as much as you think. It's more the devices they need out there and the water they need for agriculture.
Yeah, irrigation systems, because also, the vast majority of it is the Australian outback, which is just dry, desolate area, which actually has, crops growing out there, so water needs to be taken there.
So is there not a question maybe that as we go forward, maybe there should be more focus on where certain industries are located, and because we are probably never gonna let go of what air travel and what global shipping, because that's just what the world has relied on now, is it worth looking into focusing on places that are best suited in terms of their climate and conditions to produce certain goods?
Yeah,
But is that fair to say, and is that fair to do, because a country might be disadvantaged because it has the perfect conditions for so many things, and then becomes just a giant either agricultural hub or manufacturing?
Yeah, that's the thing, is because, at the moment, all of the carbon dioxide is concentrated in, some of it is concentrated in China, but if you spread all the manufacturing out, you're still probably going to have the same carbon dioxide output. It's just going to be just higher for every individual country, rather than slightly lower for all countries, just higher for one country.
What do you think is better? Because obviously in Australia, they have a, I think it's actually heating up, but for a long time they had a big hole in their ozone layer, so they had a lot of ultraviolet radiation getting in, which was bad for their environment. But is it better to have one place which is kind of screwed up because of all their environmental issues, or to have lots of places which are minorly screwed up all around the world. Honestly, I think we should follow New Zealand's example as a country. Like, I'm a general, don't live in New Zealand. They seem to have like they'd be in control of everything, like climate and stuff.
And I mean, the one we should be looking up to most is Bhutan, because they're the only country that's carbon neutral, or I think they're carbon negative actually at the moment, which is I don't know how on earth they manage. I don't know how they manage that, but they
It's all
are.
mountains. There's nothing there. It's
Yeah,
just
true.
trees. So
You have no people in your country.
See, the thing is,
Only Buddhist monks.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's Buddhist
but
monks.
like, whenever you're looking at statistics about different places, you have to analyze exactly why they are the way they are, because it's like, oh my god, we should all hail Bhutan, but then it's like, well, if you look further into it and actually gain a knowledge of what the land use is, what the industry is like there, of course it's going to have like so few emissions, because you don't have the same demand or the same sites, like industry site. So like, it's always a bit like, you guys have to take any statistics you get, especially in the media.
I think that there's a big issue with China, like with its people no longer being poor. As they get richer, they're going to obviously be far more connected to the world.
There's a massive wealth divide.
And like, we kind of, having poor people helps keep emissions down. Like, because if all of Africa suddenly became like urbanized and industrialized, it would really add a lot of emissions on. So it's how are we going to cope with kind of economic development?
Yeah, that's actually a
No,
good
but poor
point.
people don't have that technology that's like more carbon efficient and that kind of stuff. So they're just burning coal and wood. So there's
But
nothing.
it's that middle phase, isn't it? As poorer people get rich enough to have that disposable income and access those non-renewable technologies, don't we need to bridge that gap and jump from the poor people who have lack of access to everything and cut out the middle section where they use the non-renewable technology and give them a cheap renewable option? I think it's all about adjusting where our industry focuses.
Yeah, and finding a solution.
What we
That's
prioritize.
because that's where
If you give them an alternative that is economically viable in that a growth phase, then they'll latch onto it. You need to give the other option before it's too late and before they depend on the non-renewable one.
That's the problem though, because there isn't one. Like coal and oil are like the easiest to burn and the cheapest to purchase. Everything else requires a lot of setting up and money to build, make, and maintain. So it's much more difficult than finding the perfect.
Yeah, I think this is where the World Bank would come in, because because we're each funding money into the World Bank, and if that gets distributed, we could have a certain section just for low-income countries, and supplying them with enough money to be able to afford these renewable resources, rather than going directly into coal and stuff like that, which is cheaper.
How much money does the World Bank have? Like, I don't know how it works. Is it just USA or?
I think like most.
I'll Google it.
Yeah.
It approved $4.3 billion in lending in 2019. But it's not saying how much money it actually has.
Probably trying to create that choir.
I mean, that's not $4.9 billion. Isn't that much?
No,
Like,
that's what I was thinking.
That's like $4 per person in China. So.
But if you think about it, like, Donald Trump spent $1 trillion on weapons for the military, like the comparison between that and the 4.9 billion is insane.
Also, the thing to consider, right, it's all about priorities, isn't it? It's about shifting the global and, like, especially political culture to one of prioritizing the environment. Like, you can clearly see where the priorities don't match up with what most people would say the greatest global needs are. Like, weapons and arms are not, well, it's debatable, but I would say personally, I would not say they're very important relative to like people's health and the environment.
Yeah, like famine and things like that. Like,
it's all about shifting in a political sense, and therefore an economic and like marketing sense, like where we want to be able to, you know, have a bit of damage to our economy by investing in certain renewable technology things, but then have a long-term benefit for health, or would you rather just like leave it so long that everyone eventually has an economic collapse because they can't deal with all these irreversible changes that we've made from climate change? And it's all the foresight of like actually planning ahead that I think some people just aren't willing to do because they're like, well, it's not immediate. It's not. I don't
Well,
care.
it's coronavirus, wasn't it? A bit. Like we didn't want to.
Yeah.
I think
It's
COVID's a
undeniable.
special case.
Yeah.
I'll get off track here, so I'll leave it for now. But I could go on.